Released in November 2010, Black Ops is what I have to consider the fourth and final installment of Call of Duty's golden years. Coming after the record-breaking success of Modern Warfare 1 and 2, Black Ops was Treyarch's follow-up to World at War, and with previous games either being set in World War II or the present day, it was one of the most unique entries in the series with its Cold War plot. It's also the last Call of Duty game that I sank a considerable amount of time into online, while still at the peak of my gaming powers. I don't think these stats are too bad if I do say so myself. The campaign is primarily told through the eyes of CIA operative Alex Mason, and more specifically, lots of flashbacks. Waking up in an interrogation room and strapped to a chair you can actually break out of in the main menu for an achievement, Mason is bombarded with questions by two unknown men about a numbers broadcast. He then recalls several events from the past in an attempt to answer their questions, setting up the missions of the game. The first of which, Operation 40, takes place in Cuba during the Bay of Pigs invasion. And if you thought Activision was done with controversy after that mission in Modern Warfare 2, well, think again, because here our objective is to assassinate Cuba's notorious former president, Fidel Castro. After getting an introduction to most of the story's main characters and causing a scene in a bar, we fought through the streets before escaping in an abandoned car and eventually found ourselves overlooking Castro's building from the other side of a large ravine. And once the airborne forces had commenced their invasion, we ziplined across and started clearing out the compound, which led us to the final door standing between ourselves and the target. Killing Castro in this game was so controversial it made international news, with the government-run website stating what the United States did not achieve in more than 50 years, it now tries to do virtually, and you definitely don't see that kind of reaction often. You only get this slow motion cutscene if you manage to get a headshot, although it honestly seems easier to aim for the head than anywhere else, and you also get the Death to Dictators achievement. With the target down, we fought back out of the building and into the courtyard, where I started to struggle a little bit, until I realised that I was just meant to sit back and wait for the support to arrive and take out everything for me. Crazy what a bit of patience can do. This led to the final part of the mission, the airfield getaway. The only problem is that the end of the runway is blocked by hostile vehicles, so in order to save the day and the rest of my squad, I jumped off and manned a nearby AA gun. Destroying the vehicles allows the plane to take off, somehow. Surely they're still blocking the runway, but before I could put too much thought into that, I'm dragged off the anti-aircraft gun and knocked unconscious, although I did get an achievement for my efforts. And it turns out that the Castro that we thought we killed was actually a double, because upon waking back up, the real one is standing right there, and he hands us over to the game's main antagonist, Dragovich.
Plans for you, American.
After further interrogation, Mason recounts being imprisoned in the Russian gulag Vorkuta, and during this time he befriended Viktor Reznov, a former Red Army soldier and absolute icon from Call of Duty World at War. Reznov assists Mason in sparking a prisoner uprising, obviously with the ultimate goal of escaping Vorkuta. And we start off in a fight with Reznov to draw out a guard, kill him with a rock, and complete step 1 of the escape plan. After this, we ascend the elevator to the surface, witness a friendly brute named Sergey mutilate someone with a pickaxe, and then use a coal truck to take cover from machine gun fire from the guard tower as the uprising moves outside. The guard tower is then destroyed by an improvised slingshot device once I'd survived enough time behind the coal truck. And I then get a chance to man a similar device myself as 3 more targets need to be taken out. I believe there's actually an achievement for only needing 3 shots to destroy all 3 buildings, but I didn't get it in this run, so that will have to wait for another day. This leads to the first section of the game I actually felt somewhat close to being stuck on, step 5 with escape, skewering the winged beast. You're pretty well pinned down by the machine gun fire coming from the helicopter, and its time to kill is not long at all. Gunfire does absolutely nothing against it, so the only way to deal with it involves getting to the other side of the area and into cover. As well as the helicopter, there are also the prison guards on foot, just to make life more difficult. In the end, I managed to make it across by taking the left-hand side, although I was very twitchy on the trigger, so I'm glad this game doesn't have the Call of Duty 2 friendly fire mechanic, and just instantly revert you to the last checkpoint. And from the roof of this little building, I was able to fire off the harpoon and bring down the chopper. Next we fought through another heavily guarded building, where Sergey heroically gives his life to hold open the closing door. And after that, Reznov cracks open the armory, allowing me to wield my iron fist, and from there absolutely steamroll our way out. The final part of the escape was a bike chase and a jump onto a moving train, leaving Reznov behind and unlocking the Give Me Liberty achievement. The third mission, USDD, follows Mason's escape from Vorkuta, and it's mainly cinematic, taking place in the Pentagon. It's worth mentioning here that this game is actually the first time in Call of Duty history that the playable character talks.
I felt like everyone was watching us. And watching me.
But I guess it'd be a bit harder to interrogate someone who can't speak. And after being led through with Hudson, who is now Mason's handler, the US Secretary of Defense introduces us to a mysterious figure who reveals himself to be President Kennedy. He informs Mason that, as the best man the CIA has, he must eliminate Dragovich to protect the lives of America from danger. And at the same time, Mason visually hallucinates assassinating Kennedy, so yeah, he's clearly not in the best state of mind right now, but I do unlock the VIP achievement. Following this meeting, we're dispatched to the USSR to sabotage the Soviet space program. The first step is brutally murdering 2 guards to steal their uniforms, which then unsurprisingly sends the base into alert when the bodies are found, so we had to get a move on. There were various buildings to clear out before I got to make use of a new weapon, the crossbow and its explosive bolts. And speaking of explosive bolts, there's an achievement for getting 30 kills with them. We rescued one of our squad, Weaver, who had just had his eyes gouged out, but very thoughtfully his captures had at least dressed the wound. The next part of the mission was fighting to the controls and aborting the launch of a missile, and this bit was actually a little tricky. Any section that has a timer generally needs a bit of good fortune as well as skill to push through before it's too late. Although this is nothing on some of the other timed areas from previous Call of Duty games, looking at Yuno fighting in the war room. Luckily I did have some smoke grenades, and these are normally the saviours for any difficult section, and I tried to spread them out and help with the kamikaze rushing. It took me about 15 minutes, but I did reach the control room, although it was too late to stop the launch of the rocket. But in a stroke of good fortune, there was a very conveniently placed rocket launcher chilling outside, which took it out nicely. The final part of the level takes place in the underground facility, and after about 20 minutes of pushing through infinitely spawning waves of enemies, we made it to the end. I'm just thankful that this part didn't have a timer, because that would have been horrific. And finishing up the mission unlocked the Cold Warrior achievement for completing Operation 40, Vorkuta, and Executive Order on Veteran difficulty. 5 years later in 1968, Mason is deployed in Vietnam to investigate the Soviet presence. And I'll tell you now, this mission, well, one checkpoint in particular, caused me lots of pain and suffering, and it was all down to my own stupidity really. The level starts with some very fitting classic rock playing over the radio and Woods looking like he could do with a shower. The area comes under attack and I helped clear out the trenches before holding the line by destroying 3 T-55s with the nearby anti-tank launchers. This leads to the section that had me completely stumped. The objective is, well, that's the problem. I didn't actually know what I was meant to be doing. There's a hill leading to a weapons bunker and more trenches that have enemies just constantly pouring over, infinitely respawning World at War style, and no matter what I tried, I failed. On the very few occasions that I made it down to the bottom of the hill and into that trench, I died pretty much instantly, and most of my time was sat near the bottom wondering what on earth I was meant to be doing. This part brings me nicely onto a mechanic that was introduced in Black Ops, and if anything was just causing me a headache. So in previous Call of Duty games, no matter if you're walking, sprinting or obviously standing still, when you went prone you'd do it on the spot. Maybe carry forward a tiny bit of momentum, but basically not noticeable. In Black Ops however, if you're sprinting in an attempt to drop to the floor, you'll diving leap forwards, and for me, that just meant launching myself out into the open and offering myself up as an easy kill for the enemy AI. I actually attempted this checkpoint across 3 or 4 sessions over the course of a month before giving up each time and deciding it could wait for another day before finally cracking it. And I did feel like a bit of an idiot when I did. So these barrels that are chilling down here, it eventually dawned on me that maybe they have an importance of some kind after seeing Woods kick one down into the trench. And now looking back, there's actually a dialogue at the start of this section that gives it away, and without doing this, the enemies will just continue to spawn. But to be fair, as I was planning out this video, it did make me feel a bit better to read on the wiki that, and quote, many players get stuck at this point as the objective is not clearly defined. So there you go. And after a combined total of more than 1 hour, I was on to the next checkpoint. With that behind me, I was able to storm through towards the end of the level, getting to use a flamethrower attachment myself before saving Woods from an NBA soldier, and finally destroying 6 more tanks with rockets. And just like the slingshot earlier, there's an achievement for destroying all the tanks with only 6 shots, but also just like earlier, I didn't manage to do it. So again, it will have to wait for another day. And once all those were taken out, the mission was over and unlocked another story related achievement. And it wasn't only that level that I stormed through with this newfound confidence and belief, because I actually ended up completing the entire rest of the game in the same sitting. It was a pretty long day. Next up was the 6th mission, the Defector. The objective here is to recover intel and Dragovich from an unnamed defector in the city, and with the area being under attack, we've got to reach him before it's too late. After stylishly crashing through the windows of a compound and avoiding death in the doomed helicopter, I got my hands on a shotgun with incendiary rounds, and getting 10 kills with these unlocked the Dragon with an achievement. From here, Woods and I continued to clear the buildings whilst another chopper supported us from the outside, mowing down rooms full of enemies and generally just making our job pretty easy. Before too long we made it to the room holding the Defector, and to Mason's surprise, it's our boy Reznov. And Reznov tells us Dragovich is still around and planning an attack on the west. We moved onto the streets, and this time I was able to target the air support attacks by using a radio, and killing 20 enemies with this unlocked the Reigning Pain achievement. After pushing through the rest of the streets, we made it to the final part of the level, a holdout as the NBA soldiers surround us and close in. I actually got briefly stuck here because we were given a target designator again, but I had absolutely no idea what I was meant to be calling the bombing run in on. After an embarrassing amount of deaths trying to work it out, I noticed the tank just chilling here out on the street. So once that was destroyed, we were able to make our way to the water's edge and leave via boat, just about escaping the imminent massive explosion. This mission was also very generous with the gamer score because completing it unlocked another 2 achievements, one story related and one for finishing SOG in the Defector on veteran difficulty. After Mason's escape, the campaign shifts to a mission in Hong Kong where Hudson and Weaver are sent to find and interrogate Dr. Clark, a scientist working under Dragovich. The level starts with a lovely scene involving some broken glass in Dr. Clark's mouth, and then Dragovich's men discover our position and we have to escape through the apartment buildings and across many rooftops. There are a lot of enemies to navigate here, so this mission actually ended up taking me quite a while. I had to take my time and memorise where the enemies would spawn, but slowly I pushed through. There's no particularly tricky section in this mission, just a lot of somewhat difficult areas standing in the way. And as we fought through the rooftops, the interrogation continued, but just as Dr. Clark started to explain what the mysterious numbers mean, he's shot in the head with a sniper. And shortly after that, friendly agents arrive, allowing us to make a quick getaway and unlock another story-related achievement.
His name's Steiner.
Back in the shoes of Mason now in his interrogation, and he reveals the story as told to him by Reznov during their time at Vorkuta, of the history of Dragovich and his closest allies. And this mission puts the player in control of Reznov and takes place shortly after World War II, and features another well-known character of the series, World at War to be specific, Dmitry Petrenko. It starts with fighting through the snowy environment, looking for the German scientist Steiner, who Dragovich once captured alive. Steiner was the creator of the Nova 6 chemical, which is a nerve agent capable of killing anyone exposed to it in seconds, and the Germans had planned for rockets carrying Nova 6 to be fired at its enemies but lost the war before it was possible. The last reserves of the gas lay within the depths of the ship, but upon discovering it, it turns out Dragovich wants to see the effects of the gas firsthand. Dmitry is chucked into one of the chambers with 2 others, whilst Reznov and another 2 are thrown into the second. The weapon is deployed in the former, and we get to watch everyone inside suffer an agonising death, and in the words of Reznov, cage like animals instead of dying for their country. But before the second chamber is condemned to the same fate, British commandos break into the ship and fire a rocket that very conveniently sets us free, and from here it is a 3-way battle out. We armed the gas reserves with explosives, and that started a 3-minute countdown to the ship's destruction. I could remember there was an achievement for escaping on veteran within a certain amount of time, so I went full send here, running, gunning, and mostly hoping. This is a pretty tough achievement because it goes against all the things that you think you should be doing on veteran. I died several times attempting to speed my way out before eventually getting it with literally 1 second or even less left. The mission ends with Reznov telling Mason that Dragovich, Kravchenko and Steiner must die for what they've done. The interrogation moves back to 1968, and Mason describes how he and the rest of his squad fought their way through the Viet Cong controlled territory in an attempt to chase Kravchenko. This mission starts off in a downed helicopter, a helicopter which starts sinking rapidly, but just as all hope is looking lost, the hero Reznov opens up the escape latch from the outside. And from here, Woods and I engaged in a little stealth mission up the river, making our way into a village and planting some C4, and ruining some peaceful sleeps. Unlocked the up close and personal achievement here for silently killing 3 Viet Cong enemies. We regrouped with the other SOG operatives and go loud by detonating all the C4 that I've just planted on the structures. There were a ton of enemies to clear in the village, including an anti-air gun, while we kept pushing forward through several deaths and rat's nest, one of which I was sent down to clear. And that doesn't end particularly well for Swift. Although what he obviously lacks in defense against the VC ambushers, Reznov does not. As a side note, this pistol I'm using in this section is pretty brutal and graphic, resulting in a lot of stumpy limbs. And eventually, we made it to a small radio station which Kravchenko had been using, containing documents on the effects of the Nova 6 gas. Unfortunately, he also rigged the place to blow, so we are forced to crawl to an exit which begins to collapse. The tunnel escape ends with a lovely quick time of digging through some rocks because seemingly every game needs to throw in a quick time event every now and then. And once back out in the open on the cliff tops, Woods and Bowman come to the rescue, bringing up the end of the 9th mission and another achievement for completing Project Nova and Victor Charlie on Veteran. Picking straight up from where we just left off, the group is then sent to find a crashed Soviet cargo plane carrying Nova 6. The first section of this mission involves piloting a boat along a river and destroying a mix of enemies on foot, structures and vehicles using an M60 machine gun. And a random fact for you, apparently this part isn't playable on the Wii version of the game, so there you go. A shout out to another iconic and very fitting song to make an appearance, Sympathy for the Devil, which plays over the radio throughout this part. And after destroying lots of enemy troops, radio towers, guardhouses and trucks, we ran into an MVA PT boat that needs to be destroyed. You might be getting some World at War flashbacks here, but thankfully it's just the one and pretty easy to deal with by making the most of the cover. From there, we park up and go on foot after getting radio confirmation of the downed plane in the area. There's not too much distance to cover here, but it did take me a little while because the place is absolutely swarming with enemies and it's not always the easiest to spot them with the long grass, big rocks and trees, including my least favourite type of tree, the bulletproof one. Friendly helicopters appear for an overwatch, but unfortunately they are quickly destroyed by Russian 1's, and we made it to the C-130 and climbed across the wing into the wreckage and to some crates that we thought would contain Nova 6, but instead only a map of the area and the China Lake grenade launchers. This leads to Woods claiming that the Russians are trying to frame the USA. And to make matters worse, the plane wreckage is then ambushed by Spetsnaz and VC troops. I managed to take a load out of the grenade launcher, as well as a PT boat with a wonderfully placed shot, but before long, the wreckage is hit by an enemy helicopter and crashes to the ground. The misery doesn't stop there though, because Dragovich appears, as well as Kravchenko, who gives Mason a solid boot to the head, meaning for the second time in this campaign, he has been taken hostage, so it's going well. Again, the perspective switches to Agent Hudson, who is sent on a mission to infiltrate the base Dr. Clark mentioned during interrogation. Located in the Russian mountains, this base is the suspected development center of Nova 6. The mission has a unique start, boarding a reconnaissance aircraft before assisting a 4-man commando team on the ground by helping them to navigate past enemy Russian patrols. Throughout the beginning of the level, the viewpoint changes between the thermal screen and Hudson as the squad combats and patrols the suppressed weapons. After a few snaps between the two, the scouting is over and the objective is to locate and seize evidence of weaponized Nova 6 gas. With the weapon of choice being a crossbow, obviously the aim is to maintain stealth, but I'm not actually sure if you fail the mission if you're detected. But anyway, that stealth approach is quickly thrown out when you go rappelling through the windows of a facility with assault rifles in hand. Although at least they're suppressed, I guess. With the substation taken, we then moved further down into the mountains, and this reminded me some of those Modern Warfare 2 Spec Ops missions. I'd say from back in the day. I actually only replayed them earlier this year for a video. And the next building we had to take was the satellite station, and by now the element of surprise was completely gone. Once I'd ripped the fuses from the box, the communications had been severed and it was time to leave. Immediately after getting back outside, an RPG dakes down the catwalk, sending one of your teammates to his doom. I then decided to join him when I walked backwards to try and get a bigger run up for the jump. Not my finest moment. The detonation also causes a large avalanche, so as the snow starts to rush in behind, we have no choice but to stylishly base jump down the mountains. The landing zone is just outside the main compound, and within sight are enemy troops burning evidence of their research. I actually got stuck on this part for a good 20 or so minutes because there are a few tricky bits to navigate before getting another checkpoint. The guys on the ground aren't too bad to deal with, but up in the guard tower is a very annoying machine gunner and I just couldn't seem to kill him. Maybe I just missed every single shot, which is entirely possible, but maybe he can't be killed and you just need to survive the dash into the building. A dash that I did survive, only to blow myself up clearing the last enemy out. But after some perseverance, I got there and we made it to the control room, and in the surprise to absolutely no one, as it is a recurring theme by now, this place has also been rigged to blow. Dr. Steiner remotely contacts the team at this point and offers information in exchange for his safety. And to summarise, Dragovich is trying to eliminate all loose ends in regards to the Nova 6 project, and all across America he has sleeper agents ready to release the chemical when activated by the numbers broadcast. A broadcast that only Steiner knows how to crack, and will only do so if we go protect him at his location on Rebirth Island. Once he finishes talking, there is a 3-minute countdown to escape before detonation, and we do so just before the entire facility gets buried in an avalanche. Following the crash site mission, Mason and Woods are held in partially submerged wooden cages before they are led into a cave to play some Russian roulette. Bowman, who was also captured by the Viet Cong, refuses to take part, so instead gets a pipe to the back of the head in a pretty brutal scene. Woods is then brought in, and after the gun dry fires, he sees the bullet in the next chamber and subtly, / not so subtly, gives Mason the go-ahead to start the escape. Just lucky that none of these guys could speak English apparently. One of the captors is a Russian who attempts to flee the cave system, but we deal with him and then climb up the hatch ourselves. This leads to the second part of the mission, acting as pilot and gunner of a Hind. Going up the river, there are a large variety of targets to deal with, but the only ones that cause me any issues were the 2 enemy choppers. You're not able to control the vertical movement when flying, only the horizontal, so I mostly just strafed around in a circle hoping for the best. And once I'd taken those out, we landed near Kravchenko's compound and fought our way inside, not helped by some of the worst shooting I've ever captured on film. And inside the cave we found holding cells containing American soldiers, as well as Reznov. This man just can't stay away. And together we pushed through the final room of the cave, and this took me quite a few attempts to clear as there were just enemies absolutely everywhere, including the walkway above, making it hard to find cover sometimes. Once that was dealt with, I'd made it to Kravchenko's office. Unfortunately, he was lying in wait and starts giving me a solid beating, but just as I'm about to be dealt the knockout blow, Woods comes in to save the day by stabbing him in the back. Kravchenko then has his Thanos moment and pulls the pins out of the grenade belt he's wearing, but before that detonates and kills everyone in the room, Woods throws them both out of the window. And after a brief period of mourning, Mason discovers the documents that will lead him to Rebirth Island and Dr. Steiner. And that is exactly where we head to next. The mission Rebirth is where Mason's story converges with Hudson's, and is also the point in the campaign at which all our little minds were blown all those years ago. Seriously, this campaign is really good and I advise you to play it through again yourself. First, we're in the shoes of Mason and have to sneak into the facility alongside Reznov, avoiding searchlights as well as enemy patrols. And things get louder inside, and there are a fair amount of guards to fight through, and also lots of test monkeys in cages. I could remember that there was an achievement related to killing them, but stupidly decided not to spend a few moments checking what the requirement was specifically, and instead just shot at any that I could see, and wondered why the achievement wasn't popping. It turns out that you need to kill 7 monkeys in under 10 seconds, which I did by throwing a grenade into this chamber. And this leads to Steiner's office where, as 2 figures try to break through the glass from the outside, Viktor Reznov declares his name, executes Steiner, and finally has his revenge. Or does he? Because the mission then enters a flashback occurring 20 minutes earlier when the CIA's assault on Rebirth Island begins. Now we're playing as Hudson, and we start in an APC and fight through the streets featuring some floating AI corpses. The APC is then destroyed by a helicopter, which in turn drops Nova 6 onto the squad, and you get an up close view of what happens if you don't have your gas mask on. There are a lot of enemies to fight through here, and unlike the rest of the game, you can actually take permanent damage. Cracks will appear on the mask, and if you take too much, the hazmat suit will break open, and that doesn't end well. After about 10 minutes, I was back into the clean air and up against the final defences of the facility. We also tried to contact Mason at this point, but he isn't responding. It took me another 10 or 15 minutes or so to get through this area because I found it a little bit difficult, but when I did, I was faced with something magical. There must be something about this level because in all my years of playing Call of Duty games, I haven't really seen many glitches, none that I can think of anyway. Admittedly, I've only played the older games, so I'm not sure what the more recent ones are like in an era where games are seemingly rushed out, but that all made what I stumbled across here even more glorious. I had a look online and couldn't find anyone else who'd experienced this, just T-posing enemy after T-posing enemy. Admittedly, it was a bit of an immersion killer, but still very enjoyable. Eventually, I had enough and moved forwards towards Steiner's office through the same rooms that I did as Mason not long ago, but unfortunately, we take a slightly different door this time and find ourselves on the opposite side of the window to where Mason stands, declaring that he's in fact Viktor Reznov and will have revenge. We tried to break through the glass to stop him, needing Steiner alive for the information regarding the numbers, broadcast and sleeper agents, but don't manage it in time. So at this point it's clear that Mason has been acting alone the entire time. Reznov actually died during the escape from Vorkuta. The flashbacks end there, and the game returns to the interrogation where the revelations continue, which is probably why that's also the name of this next mission. The interrogators reveal themselves to be Hudson and Weaver, and Hudson explains that Mason was subjected to extreme mental conditioning whilst at Vorkuta in order to turn him into a sleeper agent who had performed Soviet missions in America, including assassinating the president. However, Reznov hijacked his programming and used it to instill an absolute devotion to complete Reznov's vow for revenge, to kill Dragovich, Kravchenko, and Steiner for what they had done. So all of the times we thought we were seeing Reznov in various missions after that point, those were just visions caused by some good old brainwashing trauma. Mason then focuses on the monitor's numbers and sees what he couldn't before. He realizes the broadcast is coming from the Rusalka, a Russian ship stationed in Cuba. So now we have made it to Redemption, the 15th and final mission of Black Ops. Beginning with an airborne CIA assault on the Rusalka, I took control of the gunship and after destroying the air defences, including an enemy chopper, crash landed onto the helipad and began dealing with the mass amount of foot soldiers on the deck. Once below, we realised that the ship is just a surface station and that the real number station is underwater. And with the confirmation that this is indeed the source of the broadcast, Hudson is happy to bring in the Navy, sink it, and call it a day. But Mason refuses to rest until Dragovich is eliminated, so on we go. Diving down and infiltrating the underwater base is a pretty cool environment for the final section of the game, especially as it starts to fall apart once the Navy's bombardment begins. And there were a fair few enemies to fight through, but no area that was too tricky, and before long, we made it to the control console and shut down the broadcast. Dragovich then appears from the shadows, but Call of Duty has never really done boss fights, so a few seconds later, we're throttling him underwater. There's some really good and slightly creepy dialogue here, as Mason accuses Dragovich of screwing with his mind, and even attempting to get him to assassinate his own president.
Gets me on! I can make you kill my own president! Right?
And with Dragovich finally dead, Mason and Hudson escape the crumbling underwater station by swimming to the surface. And as we do, we get some congratulations from the voice of Reznov before reaching the American fleet. Weaver proclaims victory, but Mason, still haunted by his last conversation with Dragovich, is not so sure. Then we get an even creepier cutscene to end the game. Firstly, a woman narrating seemingly random numbers, but then footage of President Kennedy shortly before his assassination. Mason can be heard saying related numbers and words, such as the date and location of his death, and even 6.5mm referring to the caliber of bullets allegedly fired by Lee Harvey Oswald. And the footage ends with the view shifting to the crowd gathered around the president, and as the music gets nice and tense, the camera zooms in and reveals Mason as part of the crowd, implying that he did indeed carry out his initial programming. And that is the end. The Black Ops Master achievement is mine for finishing every mission on Veteran, and I've never been someone who has particularly paid attention to the story aspect of Call of Duty campaigns, so take my opinion with a pinch of salt, but this one has to be the best I've played. Although I've heard Black Ops 2 is a lot of people's highlight of the entire series, I haven't played it yet, so I'll need to do that one soon. Let me know which one your favourite is. And I'll be back for at least one more Black Ops video because after the credits roll, the beginning cutscene of 5 plays, the Zombies map unlocked by completing the campaign. And if you know how much I struggled to do the World at War Zombies achievements, well, you already know that I'm going to be in for a bad time with these. But until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.